Americans are lining up in front of empty store shelves on Independence Day. Yet just across the border, Canadian farmers are celebrating the biggest harvest in years. A nation that once fed the world now depends on its northern neighbor to fill every meal. Beef milk flour vegetables, once the pride of American agriculture, are quietly being replaced by Canadian products. No bombs, no natural disasters. Yet the consequences feel like a war won, where citizens turn their backs on homegrown food and farmers are left with harvests they can't sell. Something is happening, and it's happening so fast most people haven't even noticed. The following 5 US-Canada state pairings will reveal who's feeding America today and who's slowly being left behind. California, British Columbia. If America were a giant body, then California used to be the stomach, the organ that fueled the entire nation with food. From fertile valleys stretching for hundreds of miles, California's green produce once fed the country. 90% of America's lettuce, over 80% of its celery and carrots came from here. No exaggeration if you've eaten a salad anywhere in the US. Over the past 30 years, chances are the greens came from California soil. But today even Californians are eating vegetables, imported from Canada. The label product of Canada is showing up more and more across Southern California supermarkets, from Walmart to Ralph's, from Trader Joe's to local corner stores. Not because people's tastes have changed, but because they no longer have much of a choice. California is falling in the very sector it once ruled. Year after year, vegetable growers in Salinas Valley, proudly known as the salad bowl of the world, have been battered from every direction. Water prices have skyrocketed. Transportation costs have surged. Fertilizer, seeds, machinery, everything is more expensive. Immigrant labor, the backbone of harvest seasons, has been restricted. And government aid, it comes too late or never arrives at all. Meanwhile, just across the border, British Columbia, once known only for its harsh cold, is moving quietly, yet decisively. The Canadian government is heavily investing in industrial greenhouses, massive structures rising out of the frost, where vegetables grow year-round under perfectly controlled conditions. No need to worry about drought or rain, no dependence on seasonal labor. Everything is automated, while California's fields dry up and gather dust-refrigerated trucks from Vancouver roll steadily across the border, carrying clean, crisp, consistent vegetables deep into the heart of America. That's what the US supply chain no longer has: predictability. Supermarkets can't wait on erratic harvests or abandoned fields. They need goods on shelves on time every day. And they're choosing Canada not out of loyalty to another nation, but because the domestic system simply can't deliver anymore. California, once the proud symbol of American agricultural power, now survives on imports. A land bathed in year-round sunshine is now bowing to a colder region, not because the climate is better, but because the system is. Many people may not have noticed. But this shift isn't happening at the border, it's unfolding inside the kitchens of everyday Americans. You walk into a supermarket in Bakersfield and grab a bag of pre-washed lettuce, chilled, neatly packed, looking fresh. You assume it came from the valley next door. But no, it traveled nearly 1,000 miles from Vancouver. And how does that feel? It's like living next to a bakery, but buying your bread from another town simply because your own oven has gone cold. Once the nation's produce powerhouse, California is gradually becoming just another consumer. And in this new picture, British Columbia isn't just supplying food, it's shaping the rhythm of America's consumption. Canada didn't seize market share with force. America left the field wide open. California's farmers didn't walk away because they stopped loving the land. They walked away because they felt betrayed. A lifetime of feeding others, and now they feel abandoned. By the government, by the distribution system, by the customers. Meanwhile, Canadian farmers, once the underdogs of agricultural trade, are now backed by every kind of support, low-interest loans, subsidized energy, greenhouse development funds, and official export pathways to the US. They're not just growing crops, they're growing trust, and American consumers are voting with their wallets. They're choosing what they can count on. Sadly, that confidence is no longer rooted in local soil. Have Americans changed? Not really. They still want to support homegrown food if it's still available. But when shelves go empty, pride loses to convenience and availability. Which leads to a deeper question. Can a nation still call itself an agricultural superpower if it can't feed its own people? When British Columbia, once just a cold blip on the US map, becomes the lifeline for dinner tables in San Francisco, San Diego, and even Los Angeles, this is no longer competition. This is a power shift in the food chain. And if California, an undefeated icon of the 20th century, can fall, then the question becomes, what part of America still has the strength to stand? Iowa, Saskatchewan. Iowa was once America's promise, not just its geographic heart, but its heart of belief. The belief that if you sow, you will someday reap. The belief that farmers deserved a place in the nation's rhythm, not just on its sidelines. But what happens when you still sow and no one's waiting at the grain elevator? In the summer of 2025, Iowa's wheat fields ripened under the sun. But instead of the roar of combines, only the wind rustled through the drying stalks. Farmers knew that harvesting meant nothing more than piling grain into silos where it would sit with no idea when or if it would ever be sold. Each year, Iowa produces over 30 million tons of grain, contributing more than $20 billion to America's agricultural GDP. But this year, according to the Iowa Department of Agriculture, nearly 7 million tons of wheat and soybeans are sitting idle in storage simply because international buyers no longer choose the United States. The issue isn't quality. American grain is still clean, still nutrient-rich. The problem is instability. When trains are canceled, when federal railways delay shipments, when Washington changes export tariffs twice in a single quarter, no foreign company dares to sign large contracts with Iowa anymore. And that's where Saskatchewan steps in. No fanfare, no bold declarations, just 3 simple things honoring contracts, delivering on time, and not changing the rules mid-season. And so clients from Asia, Europe, South America, places that once saw the Midwest as a strategic supply hub, began turning north. While Iowa packed grain into silos, over 8 million tons of Saskatchewan wheat had already shipped out of Vancouver in just the first half of the year. Worse yet, some food processing companies within Des Moines, Iowa's own capital, are now importing flour from Canada. Not because it's cheaper, but because Canada delivers on time and doesn't throw businesses into chaos. It's a slap in the face, not just to the farmer, but to the very idea of national pride. When American bread is made from foreign flour, Iowa isn't a symbol anymore. It's just a backdrop. One question echoes through the overflowing silos of Iowa. Why am I growing wheat for America? If the bread on the table is made with Canada's flour, that's not just a question. It's an indictment, quiet but gut-wrenching, of an entire system. When a farmer feels that their work is no longer valued, it's not just money that's lost. It's the very reason to get up in the morning. They're not asking for applause. They just want to know that their sweat still runs through the veins of the national economy. And while they question the very meaning of farming, 500 kilometers to the north, Saskatchewan is celebrating another record-breaking export season. No headlines, no flags waving in triumph. But they're quietly inheriting the role Iowa once held. The world doesn't care who used to be the breadbasket. It only cares about who delivers on time, who stays out of politics, and who provides stability. And Iowa, for all its tradition, productivity, and infrastructure, has been edged out of the global supply chain because it can no longer make firm commitments. So the real question becomes, can an agricultural superpower survive if its own farmers are too abandoned to even harvest? And if Canada is now feeding the world with its grain, then what's left of America's role? Hundreds of thousands of Iowa farmers once sustained this nation through war, through depression, through inflation. They didn't quit. They just wanted a place in a modern America. But in 2025, they find themselves excluded from the dinner table, even though they grew the wheat that made the meal possible. And when the bread is baked with Canadian flour, when Iowa farmers sell their grain for less than it costs to grow, when red maple leaf flags sail from coastal ports instead of Midwestern rail yards, maybe we should stop asking, why are we losing, and start asking who actually wants us not to win. Because this collapse didn't come from outside. It began with decisions no one owned, with promises no one kept, and with an entire profession, the one that feeds a nation, being reduced to just a number on a spreadsheet. Texas. Alberta. In Texas, beef used to be a religion, from roadside diners and weekend barbecues to the family fridge. Texas beef wasn't just food, it was a living symbol of the American West, a symbol of strength, freedom, and abundance. But by the summer of 2025, in Houston, Texas's largest consumer hub, 60% of the beef sold in supermarkets bears the label Canada Origin, an unthinkable number if you ask anyone raised on Texas grasslands. What could possibly force the beef capital of America to import the very product it once exported to the world? The answer isn't quality. Texas cattle are still premium, lean, muscular, high value. But to get a single cut of meat onto a supermarket shelf, ranchers now face an obstacle course. Feed prices have doubled, water is scarce, and transportation costs have soared by over 40% since 2022. To make matters worse, many slaughterhouses, a critical link in the supply chain, have been forced to shut down. Some failed to meet updated environmental standards. Others simply couldn't operate after immigration crackdowns drained their labor force. And so even with grasslands cattle and know-how, Texas beef can't make it to market. An entire beef civilization has stalled, not for lack of cattle, but because the supply chain has collapsed. Meanwhile, north of the border, Alberta, Canada has transformed cattle ranching into a fully integrated, automated industry. From raising cattle to slaughter packaging, cold storage, and cross-border delivery, every step is streamlined, robotic, and tightly connected to a refrigerated logistics network. A single order from the US, and within hours, a cold chain container from Alberta departs its station, arriving in Houston's distribution centers the very next day. No delays, no driver shortages, no port strikes. Canada isn't just selling beef, they're selling reliability, and Texas drought alerts paint the state map. Ranching stations run low on water. Soybeans and corn, the main feed for cattle, are either scarce or priced beyond reach. At one point, raising a single steer cost over $200, while selling it earned less than $1,000. A loss from pasture to grocery shelf. The result, ranchers sold off their herds. Processing plants shut down. Grocery stores couldn't stock enough local beef. And consumers still hungry had no choice but to accept Canadian meat. A tiny sticker on the packaging. Product of Canada now represents a complete shift in the power dynamic of the beef industry. Texas used to be where beef was pride. A thick, sizzling ribeye conjured images of cowboy saddles and cookouts under wide-open skies. But in mid-2025, the scene inside North Texas slaughterhouses is pure silence. Assembly lines have stopped. The smell of fresh meat replaced by rust and dust. Hundreds of workers laid off. Cattle pens empty, not because there are no cows, but because there's no longer a reason to raise them. I didn't quit because I lost land, said a ranch owner in Abilene. I quit because the beef I produced never reached the people who needed it. That sentence captures the helplessness when you do everything right and still lose. And while Texas struggles to salvage the fragments of an industry that once fed millions, Alberta rises quietly as a new beef superpower. Alberta has no cowboys, no Hollywood prairies, no rodeos, but it has what Texas now lacks: full control of the supply chain. From genetically selected breeds suited for the cold to enclosed feed systems, automated processing, high-tech storage, and most critically cross-border logistics subsidized by Canada's federal government, Alberta is quietly redefining who feeds America its beef. Every chilled container that leaves Alberta, morning or evening, is a quiet blow to Texas's once proud legacy. No war, no announcement, but Texas is losing ground inch by inch on the agricultural power map. The irony: Texans in Houston, Dallas, and Austin still consume record amounts of beef. Yet few realize that 60% of the meat in their supermarkets no longer carries the born and raised in Texas label. Instead, they see the cold, simple phrase, product of Canada. If you're a loyal consumer, do you ever pause, glance at the label, and ask, why am I eating beef from a cold northern land in the heart of Texas? If you've ever been proud of American agriculture, have you started to wonder, are we losing more than just a few shipments? Because when beef, the soul of Western culture, is replaced, the issue isn't just about food, it's about who controls the value chain that feeds this nation. The American West didn't vanish overnight. It's evaporating like an opened milk jug left in the desert with no one bothering to put the cap back on. And while that happens north of the border, Canada is quietly filling the shelves. No fanfare, no swagger, just steadily. And step by step. Illinois, Ontario. In the supermarkets of Chicago, the third largest city in the United States, it's easy to find organic milk, free-range eggs, and fresh cheese. But the real story isn't in the products themselves, it's in the labels. A growing share of fresh foods on store shelves here now reads Ontario origin, not from neighboring Wisconsin, and certainly not from Illinois farms just a few hours away. So what's happening in the heart of one of America's most powerful agricultural industrial states? The answer lies in something consumers rarely see: the cold chain. Illinois was once a central hub of agriculture, not just because of fertile soil, but because it boasted one of the strongest domestic logistics systems in the country. Railroads, highways, warehouses, and distribution centers all worked in perfect sync to move fresh food from farm to shelf within 48 hours. But in 2025, that system began to crack. Electricity prices soared. Cold transport fuel costs jumped 1.5 times compared to 2022. Distribution centers cut back on maintenance. And most critically, several cold storage facilities on the outskirts of Chicago shut down in the past 12 months, unable to stay competitive with imported goods due to soaring operating costs. When the cold chain breaks, Illinois produce can no longer move reliably. Eggs harvested in Rockford take up to 72 hours to reach the supermarket, and some spoil before arrival. Milk from Decatur headed to Chicago's northern suburbs is rejected because it fails to meet temperature standards, and so the local advantage collapses. The gap quickly filled by imports from Ontario, Canada. Backed by Canada's federal government, Ontario has built an expansive cross-border refrigerated container network. From its eastern farming stations, food is packed industrially loaded onto chilled trucks and delivered to Chicago via Detroit in just 24 to 30 hours. No delays, no heat exposure, no middlemen. 12–18% cheaper than Illinois' internal shipping routes. And so right in the state of Illinois, Chicagoans are now eating eggs, milk, cheese from 800 kilometers north, not from 300 kilometers west. Consumers might not notice. They want clean, cheap, fast. But to farmers, to logistics planners, and to those who once believed in America's ability to feed itself, this is a steep, undeniable decline. Illinois doesn't lack food. It's simply losing the ability to deliver it to its own people. In a nation once proud of being self-sufficient, it's no longer shocking to see supermarkets filled with imports. But now something feels more unsettling than ever. Even the most basic staples, eggs, milk, butter, cheese, long considered the heart of local agriculture, are quietly being replaced. Every day, Chicago shoppers head to store shopping as usual, never realizing that the logistics ecosystem behind their food is shifting beyond their control. As Illinois' internal cold chain crumbles due to costs, underinvestment, and tightening regulations, Ontario's cold chain runs like a Swiss watch. Not because Canada is smarter, but because they didn't lose sight of the long game. They saw the cracks in America's supply chain and moved in silently to claim it. This is no longer about cheap versus expensive. It's about who controls America's grocery shelves. Picture this. A family in suburban Chicago buys a carton of eggs. The label says Ontario. The eggs were collected in Canada, refrigerated, shipped across Detroit, stored in a local facility, and delivered fresh. Meanwhile, just a few hundred kilometers away, an Illinois farm is breaking eggs and dumping them because there's no way to get them to market. So what's the role of Illinois agriculture now? Where is state leadership when foreign goods outpace local produce on home turf? This isn't just about food. It's a map of soft power drawn in cold ink on each Canadian shipping container. Ontario isn't even the most fertile region in Canada, but they're winning because they operate as one integrated system. No silos, no finger-pointing between provincial and federal levels. They defined a clear mission. To dominate the US market, you must master everything from cold storage to customs, from barcode to box truck. Illinois, and more broadly America, is being pulled backward by the very things that were once strengths: aging infrastructure, tangled regulations, and fragmented strategy between agriculture, logistics, and retail. And the ones paying the price, working-class Americans, the ones who visit supermarkets every week and are beginning to notice milk cartons rarely say local anymore. Eggs no longer carry names of Illinois farms. Imported cheese costs less than domestic, and locally sourced has become just another marketing slogan on a poster. So we must ask, if a farm state can't deliver to its own cities, does food sovereignty still exist? If a simple breakfast eggs milk bread mostly comes from the north, what do Americans still control in the food chain that once bore their name? The answer is hard to swallow, but clear. We're losing control of our meals, not because someone invaded us, but because we let go. Once the plate was a symbol of national security. Every grain, every egg, every slice of cheese spoke to a country's ability to feed itself. But today, Americans are outsourcing their meals even when the kitchen is fully stocked. And once you depend on cross-border cold supply for daily staples, then when that chain stalls, America might not even have enough yolks to start the day. New York, Quebec, New York, the emblematic city of America, where financial, cultural, and media decisions ripple out like global mandates. But behind the skyscrapers, the power meetings, and the dazzling lights lies a truth few dare to confront. This city cannot feed itself. With over 8 million residents in the city and more than 19 million across the state, New York depends on a colossal food system to survive each day. And the problem is clear: New York lacks farmland. It lacks significant crop production. It has no large-scale agricultural economy. Less than 1.5% of New York State's land is dedicated to farming, and most of that is small-scale, semi-agricultural, or regionally limited, which means nearly all of New York City's food must come from somewhere else. Residents of Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens walk into Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, or their corner bodegas, never realizing that the milk they drink, the cheese they enjoy, and the flour in their pizza dough no longer come from nearby US states. Instead, they come from Quebec, Canada. Quebec isn't just Canada's largest dairy-producing province, it's also the nation's processing capital for dairy products. Soft cheeses, fresh butter, ice cream, yogurt, condensed milk. And Quebec has accomplished what many US states have abandoned, connecting the entire food chain from farm to fork. They don't just have farms, they have modern factories. They have refrigerated truck fleets. They have export-grade packing centers. And most importantly, they have federally backed cross-border shipping agreements. It takes less than 36 hours for milk bottled in Quebec to arrive at a Bronx distribution hub, and just 8 hours later, it's on the shelf in Lower Manhattan. No delays, no shortages, no surprises. Meanwhile, New York's neighboring states, Pennsylvania, Vermont, and Ohio, once major food suppliers, are shrinking under soaring transportation costs, underfunded cold chain infrastructure, and crippling labor shortages. The result, New Yorkers once proud of Made in USA labels are now consuming Canadian food, without realizing it, not out of preference, but because the market made the decision for them. The irony: New Yorkers pride themselves on being smart, discerning high-demand consumers, but inside their overflowing grocery bags, fewer and fewer items are locally sourced. Even farm-to-table restaurants long championing regional produce now source from Quebec, when U.S. supplies falter. Restaurant kitchens in Soho and the Upper East Side, and even hot dog carts in the Bronx, rely on Canadian cheese flour cream as part of everyday service. And when consumer habits shift so silently, the belief in local autonomy begins to fade. New York City has never been a place that grows what it eats, but at least in the past, it sourced from nearby states, preserving a semblance of domestic control. Today, even a simple breakfast of milk bread and cheese quietly tells a bitter truth. A global city that eats like an import-dependent nation. Now imagine if Canada's border were to shut down for just 7 days due to policy, weather, or anything else. Over 40% of NYC's dairy products would vanish from store shelves. That's a silent crisis few are willing to imagine: a cold chain supply shock in America's largest city. While Quebec doubles down on clean, tech-driven agriculture and sustainable farmer protection, New York has little farmland left to protect and cannot compete in production. Where Quebec has made food a national strategy, New York has turned food into a vulnerability, one that's easily manipulated by oil prices, inflation, federal trade policy, and most dangerously, the choices of a foreign government. Who would have thought that the world's financial capital, the city that prices the dollar shapes global narratives, now eats on the schedule of a northern province's logistics network? This isn't to diminish Quebec. On the contrary, it proves that Canada knows what it wants, and they're taking it container by container, leader by leader. And New York, it may still be the city that never sleeps, but on a deeper level, it may be asleep at the wheel, resting on a sense of power that's quietly slipping away. Because no nation, no matter how wealthy, how influential, can truly be powerful if it no longer controls what's on its own plate. We are living in an America where economic, military, and media power still hold strong, but if even the food on our tables must now come from outside, then what if anything still truly belongs to us? Maybe it's time Americans start asking, what do I really control in my own life if every carton of milk, every loaf of bread now comes from another nation? This video does not advocate for division within the United States, nor does it encourage separatist thinking. All content has been presented for the purpose of exploration analysis and sparking honest discussion grounded in facts, real emotions, and the current trajectory of society. We fully respect the U.S. Constitution and all federal regulations. If you found this video helpful, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our future episodes where we uncover what mainstream media often leaves behind. All insights in this video are based on current data and an independent perspective. They are not intended to offer absolute predictions, but rather to ask the questions that matter.